Now, you will see that the company limited by shares is something quite different. And I think by looking at the partnerships and the options among the partnerships, you'll understand how the company limited by shares is different. And you will see what sort of entity the company limited by shares is and what sort of decisions have been made in order to create this entity. So why did we even create the company limited by shares? As I said, we have initial investment in ships, both in the medieval period in the Mediterranean and also in the trade center of London, where the notion of buying a share of the stock held in a ship becomes quite common. And then we have companies which operate these ships and they sell shares of the vessel that can be used for merchandise. And those companies gradually transform into joint stock companies. But why use that form? The main reason is the size of the project, at least originally. Communication has changed in our lifetime, and it was not always as easy to gather together many people in conversation the way it is today. So using a company to focus the efforts of many people, even without limited liability originally, was something very valuable for projects that were too large for a small group of partners. The railroads follow or precede the company form in most countries. You'll see that the first company form set up in New York in 1811, in the UK in 1844, in Germany in 1870, in China, the Republic of China, in 1929. And as the network of railroads grew, it was necessary to have companies that could gather finance broadly in order to bring together the capital necessary to build these enormously expensive projects for thousands and thousands of miles of steel rail to build the network. And so I've explained when we have the entity, then we can talk to outsiders and we can bring them in to invest money in the project. And those outsiders would not be involved in the actual management of the project, so for them, the founders may look like professional managers, and these professional managers would have a duty to the company for the benefit of those who invest income in the company. And so the main problem with the company in terms of governance is that some people have power over other people's money. They have the power to operate the company, to cause it to write checks, to make transfers, to engage in projects. But the funds that allow that to happen are coming from a whole different set of people. And so we've got this problem of agency, where essentially there has been power delegated to the directors of the company by the various members who have financed the company. And so the company law, to make this more feasible, sets up member control rights and duties of directors. And this is where we'll spend a lot of time. We have meetings which are structured in the company's ordinance, and that allows the various members to come together in an orderly fashion and exercise their control over the company in as fair a way as possible. And then we have ultimately the right of the members to sue in court. So the company was necessary as the projects increased in size, and the basic structure of the company is that you have a person, and because that person engages in its own debts, it will limit the liability of the investor owner. The investor owner's contribution to the company will be evidenced by shares of stock that are transferable, and there will be rules that govern those who have power over the day-to-day operation of the company, and those persons are referred to as the central management, and in particular the board of directors at the top of the central management. Company law is organized around these 5 characteristics. Okay, so we'll look at the formation of the company next week. We'll look at the constitutional documents which must be submitted when the company is formed, and we'll do that as well next week. We'll look next at how the company itself interacts with the outside world, because companies can't talk. Companies can't sign their names. And so it will always be a director or some form of manager who will be acting on behalf of the company. And so here we have a very tangible presence of agency law. We'll look at the powers of directors in this agency law to contract between third persons and the company. And then we'll look at financing the company through the issuing of shares. That constitutes share capital. We'll look at debt of the company, and then how the company law protects the creditors of the company. We'll look at the accounts of the company, and that is disclosure to the members and also to the creditors. But we will not go deeply into accounts. Accounting itself, as you know, accountancy is a degree in the business school, and you would need to spend as much time studying accountancy as you do studying law to have a complete professional mastery of the topic. So what we will do is equivalent to a tour bus driving by a monument with me explaining that out of your window you can see the general shape of the monument, and I'll explain to you why the monument was erected. But the details of accounting is not something we will cover. Some of you may have degrees in accountancy before your JD studies, and I would very much welcome you making any observations in class that you think pertinent. We won't look at charges and covenants because you have that in commercial law. And so instead of covering that twice, I'll leave that to the side and spend more time on other topics in this course. Then we'll look at corporate governance, which focuses to a great extent on directors' duties and derivative actions against directors. And then we will look at the members' control rights, and that is not next term, that is this term. Now, the company itself has a basic contradiction because it should be strong, but it can be dangerous. And so a lot of the policy involved in company law is to make sure that companies are strong and efficient, but that the operation of the companies do not hurt either investors in the company or third parties. The company itself is something which is fascinating. Forgive me the analogy here to fashion. I worked as a lawyer for 4 years in the city of Milan, Italy, and we represented fashion designers in the fashion industry, which is as you noted by the names of the various sellers, Armani and such, is a very Italian industry. If you look at the fashion industry, you've got two basic categorizations: pret-a-porter, and that's the stuff that is bought off the shelf and you put it in. Like this shirt, which I bought at Marks and Spencer. You buy it, open the plastic, wash it if you're careful, and put it on. And that is simple and cheap. That's how most people will establish a company. The company ordinance has basically all of the parameters of a ready-to-go company. It's sitting there waiting for you, and you simply take it off the shelf and use it without changing anything, potentially, just like I didn't do anything to this shirt. However, you could also design your own clothing, like many people do in Hong Kong with suits. That is referred to in French as haute couture, and that simply means high cutting or high tailoring, high end, high level, high priced. This is done occasionally. I've been involved in designing, when I worked as a lawyer, designing solutions for clients. It's a lot of fun. It's very expensive for the clients, and it takes you a long time to do, but you basically design something from scratch, and you make something specially for them, just like this expensive dress in the picture was made especially for the model and for the person that purchases the dress. So we're dealing with pret-a-porter, off the shelf, company forms which are cheap and easy. And this, believe it or not, because you might wonder why I'm even talking about this, believe it or not, this is one of the main advantages of company law. A couple of persons, Oliver Williamson and Douglas North, have received Nobel Prizes for pointing this out. So let's look at Douglas North. He explains institutions exist to reduce uncertainties involved in human interaction. These uncertainties arise as a consequence of both the complexity of problems to be solved and the problem-solving software possessed by the individual. Okay, so institutions. Institutions would be something that you know what it is, you know how it works. Companies establish through their logos, through their brand names, through their reputations, institutions. If you take something like a Samsung phone, you would have a certain idea of the reliability of the product and much of the price, because very few of us understand what's going on inside a mobile phone, would be the reputation tied to the quality of the machine, which is complex. And that's why companies like Apple and Samsung do so well, and also one of the reasons why companies like Xiaomi and Huawei took a while to come into the market, because the reputation for a particular kind of a product needs to be established. So if you were to have a company and you were entering into a contract, and that company is called a company limited by shares under Hong Kong law, everyone in Hong Kong understands what they are dealing with. They know generally how you can represent the company. We'll study that in a couple of weeks. They understand what the shares are. We'll study that in a few weeks as well. They understand how limited liability works in the company. And generally they'll understand your position as a director, and they'll know where to look to find out information. Where they look is in the company's registry. So the institution of the company limited by shares as something which is standardized, predictable, and off the shelf saves people a lot of time in commercial dealings. And that's a big advantage of company law. Explanation here. All of these presentations, by the way, I'll give you the raw PowerPoint in a PDF form so you can take notes on it in class. You'll find it posted to OpenEdX. All right, so when we use a company, we delegate power, and that creates some problems because when you give something to someone, they can damage it and they can abuse it if it's power. So the agency problem number one, an agency problem is a sort of a short form that was developed by a couple of economists, Jensen and Meckling. They published an important paper in 1976, which has been influential and is generally accepted around the world on this idea that when you delegate power to someone in the company form, you're creating a kind of an agency problem because you're generally asking this person to act on your behalf, and you're giving them some power and some money that belong to you essentially, and they should act in a way that does not damage your interest. So the first problem, and the biggest one, the most famous one, will be the directors of the company, right? So we have here a vehicle, and think of the vehicle as pulling along, and the persons that want to be carried toward profit are the shareholders, and the horse here would be the board of directors who come up with ideas to compete with other companies to make money and to take the company forward. The members elect the directors, and so they give them power over the vehicle, over the vessel. And the directors have to use that power for the good of the vehicle, which the shareholders own. And this is something that is not guaranteed because people don't always behave the way they should. And that's law, right? That's why we have law. You know this from every course you studied in law. If human beings were perfect, then we would not have law, nearly any form of law. This you can see in Confucian doctrine, where he makes a difference between the gentlemen, the higher group of humans who would not need law because they would be bound by their word and by ethical behavior, and the rest of the people who need to be governed by law. And unfortunately, even the highest individuals will tend to abuse their power. And so we have law applying to everyone, and that's called rule of law. And rule of law is most of all present in commercial dealings and in company law. So we delegate power, and the company law arranges in many ways to control that delegation. So members can vote in meetings, members elect the directors will have duties to the company, and members can remove the directors and sue them for breach of duties if those directors do not behave properly. So as I've explained, this is something that was theorized as an agency cost by Jensen and Meckling, and I'll let you spend some time looking at this in peace. But the point is generally that when you give someone else power over something that you own, they can abuse that. And so the goal of law would be to achieve a balance where it's efficient to give that person power because the law makes the chance and the probability of abuse lower than the gains which come from appointing that person to run the company. Right? So the person will tend not to steal from the company because there are laws prohibiting it. They will tend to operate diligently for the company because there are duties that require that. They will tend to give you the opportunity to vote regularly because there are rules requiring that. The vote will take place in an orderly way because there are rules and procedures in the law that provide for that. Right? So the law generally makes sure that the cost of appointing someone to do your work for you is less than the benefit that you achieve from that appointment. That's the agency problem. Now, agencies do not only arise with the directors of the company. Agencies also arise with the democracy in the company.